First of all, I'm going to introduce myself very, very briefly, and then, of course, most importantly, our speakers today. So I'm Jacek, Dr. Jacek Ludwig Scarso. I'm the I'm reader in art and performance at this university, London Metropolitan University, and I also am the deputy director of Creature. And Creature stands for the Research Centre in Creative Arts, Cultures, and Engagement. And as part of Creature, we do a series of events of this kind. Many of them are live on campus. Many of them are also online, and this is to make sure that we get as much reach as possible through with our activities. But most importantly, what we champion in Creature is the idea that art practice is a form of investigation, of research, of interrogating issues that we do often as a result of artistic projects, but also that might range from more scholarly work to more practice-based work, and certainly the role of practice is really crucial in what we do, because we really do champion the idea that practice is not only a legitimate form of a vehicle for research, but also a very important one, because as you see from the speakers that are going to share their work today, it is precisely through practice that we are able to explore and truly interrogate important questions. So in particular, today we're going to discuss the idea how the theme of migration, and we'll see that this is treated with a broad lens. It's how the experience of migration is can be explored through in particular through performative practices. And by performative, we mean really a spectrum that may range from performance itself in the more direct sense, but also interdisciplinary practices that might use performance methods, or certainly dialogical relational methods to create participation. And so even the word participation will be key in today's session. So let me just give you an idea of how this session is going to be structured. And we will be exploring key questions in how performative and participatory strategies may provide new insights into the experience of migration and asylum seeking. And the event is centered around two projects, each focusing on the role of creative practice as a vehicle for research in this area of exploration. So in the first part of the event, we'll have Dr. Natalie Katsou and Debora Minà, that I'm going to introduce more specifically in a second. And the first part of the section of the event reflects on the project Performing the Asylum Law, and specifically on a series of workshops on asylum law and legal practice that took place across three British institutions, Goldsmiths, London Metropolitan, and University of Southampton, during March 2025. The main question explored is how theatre and performance can help us to interpret the law and respond to different parts of the asylum claim process. The seminar also invites attendees to reflect on the activities discussed and to contribute to the next steps and to further its questions. Then we're going to move on to the second part of the event, in which instead we'll have artist Marina Moreno, who will be discussing her project We All Come From Somewhere, funded by the Arts Council England and originally commissioned by Tate Liverpool in 2019. The project was recently presented at Fondazione Marta Czok in Venice during the 60th Biennale Arte, and celebrates the human right to movement and migration and the cultural richness of this entails. I'm also very linked to this project. I was acting as curator for the more recent edition of this project in Venice, and together with Marina, we share an interest in interactive installation, and of course Marina will be talking about how interactive installation allows for stories, in particular with this project, for stories of migration and displacements to be shared. And in Marina's project, we'll see that bearing the symbol of the shipyard rope in reference to the ports of Venice and Liverpool, the participants created sculptures reflecting the distance from their first home and the journeys traveled thereafter. And you see that the image that we used for this to publicize this event used one of Marina's images from her work. We all come from somewhere. Okay, so now I'm going to read out. So we'll do these two parts. Most importantly, after we're going to allow for discussion. Initially, I'll be moderating the discussion more directly, and then we very much welcome questions from you, the audience, and hope that this can be a fruitful discussion for all. I should say that what's also really important is that the two projects that we're talking about today are both continuously evolving. So there is, as was already mentioned before, talking about Natalie and Debora's project, but this is also very true of Marina's project as well. We welcome this discussion because it also informs future developments, both within the project and, of course, of different projects that may happen as a result of this as well. And therefore, we very much like to hear from the audience, because this also gives us a sense of the impact and, of course, of the response that people can have in this. Once again, I'm not going to insist too much on this, but if you see that your camera is on, please do try and switch it off, because it makes the video so much more slick as we record this session. So Natalie and Debora, if you want to get ready, I've asked for both of both parts of the event. Oh, thank you very much. I've asked for both parts of the event to share just 5 images or something like that, a couple of images each, rather than going through a formal presentations. And this hopefully will allow the speakers, the artists, the researchers today to share their work visually, whilst also interrogating it conceptually. And so we're going to, if Natalie, if you want to start to get ready to share your slides. In the meantime, I'm just going to read a short bio for Natalie and for Debora, before then reading later on a bio for Marina. So Dr. Natalie Katsou is a theatre and performance lecturer, a director and a writer. Her postdoctoral research at Goldsmiths investigates performing asylum, embodiment and the law in the UK and in Greece, for which she also won a Bridging Award 2023. Natalie graduated from law on her BA at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens, where she continued with her theatre studies degree. She completed her acting training at Delos Hatupi Acting School and studied piano and advanced music studies at the Athenaeum Conservatoire. She had her MFA in theatre directing at East 15 Acting School, and her PhD in philosophy and theory of theatre at the University of Athens. Natalie is the co-founder and artistic director of Enspudi Theatre Company from 2006 to 2009 in Athens, and Opera View in London from 2014 to 2017. She has published 5 poetry books and 4 theatre plays. She teaches at Goldsmiths, London Metropolitan University, and Rose Bruford. So Debora Minà is a socially engaged theatre artist, director, facilitator and academic. Her work is rooted in community engagement and participation, exploring how the creative process can foster belonging and contribute to the expansion of identity beyond limiting labels applied to us. For the past 15 years, she has facilitated the creative expression of young people and adults from refugee backgrounds, working with leading organizations in the fields of art and migration in the UK and internationally. As co-director of Feedback Theatre, she directs Luna, a theatre project that elevates the voices of women who survived forced displacement and gender-based violence. She's an associate lecturer in applied theatre at Goldsmiths, an academic mentor at London Metropolitan University, and she's investigating the healing properties of collaborative theatre, making in the context of forced migration as part of a practice-based PhD at Queen Mary University. All right, enough with the preamble. This is, but it's also really important to also share the brilliant profile of the speakers that we have at these events. So thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Debora. So you're going to just give us a taster of this project. And then, of course, through discussion later on, we'll be able to interrogate them further. So feel free to start.
Great. Thank you, Jacek, and everyone for being here. Thank you for the introduction. It's slightly intimidating to hear back my resume. It is great to be at Creature. I want to do all my thanks at the end, and this is to reiterate. I shouldn't forget because there's very many. But this being here today kind of worked backwards to push me to go into a more active part of my research and my project. As you very nicely introduced, this project that I'm working with Debora, Performing the Asylum Law, that is focusing on workshops with students, is part of the bigger postdoc research that I'm doing, which is going to be going on for a few more years. But discussing the project with Creature and other really esteemed members of that research community last year kind of pushed me to start this series of workshops. So it's really nice to see kind of like how that small circle that will open other circles is here now. The bigger project that I'm working on brings theatre and performance and law together to examine forced migration, and more specifically how theatre techniques and practice and embodied research from theatre can help understand the law and affect legal practice. The experience of the migrant is at the very center of that research project. However, this first series of workshops that we were doing started with it's a co-productive workshop with students, and we can explain a little bit why. So this is just the slides are very mild visual kind of references. This is the slide I showed to the students at the beginning of the session. These workshops have been co-designed with Debora, who has also been an extremely experienced consultant to this, and a very also patient collaborator and co-facilitator. And it's been really, really important to have that opportunity to work on something one has had a kind of like a vision and a curiosity about, with someone that has been working on that field for many, many years, from probably a different perspective and with different kind of intentions. But it's been one of the greatest benefits of this project, working with Debora. And also something to clarify, the workshop took place at Goldsmiths. That was the first one on the 6th of March, and the second one at London Met. We didn't manage to do the one in Southampton, and it's interesting from one part of the methodology, pedagogy that might be kind of there. However, the support received from Southampton University and the professors that I will bring to the surface later was incredible, and we're planning to do that in the autumn term. So it is, as you said, an ongoing project. So this workshop, the aim was, we had two parts. The aim was to investigate how we interpret law as a text from a dramaturgy perspective, for those that are more familiar with theatre terminology. So essentially how we analyze theatre before we start, in order to make it. And then the second part was focusing on the substantive interview, the big interview that people that have made an application for asylum, for getting legal refugee status, they have to go through that, and what the questions are and how that happens. And the basic principles of that workshop was exactly to introduce some activities that we had never tried before with students, and in that context, in kind of like approaching law specifically, and to allow and invite and encourage that collaboration, how students would respond to that, the observations they would make, and the suggestions they could potentially make, maybe not for something completely immediate, something that can be actioned today, but something that will help us guide this project. So what we were observing was also how the students kind of take on these activities, and what is actually happening, but also how the workshop works in a way. And what was amazing was that we had students from theatre and performance departments, both at Goldsmiths and at London Met, and from the law departments. This is just an example of the first big activity that we did together. And it is just a very short extract from what we call statute, like the legal text, the play text for law. And this is a very newly introduced bill, so it's not enacted yet. It hasn't been voted. It's not to be enacted in that sense. It's under discussion. Very frightfully, it probably will go forward, but that's an assumption. It's not something that I know. It's at this moment now in time, it's past the second discussion at the Parliament, and it's going through observations and corrections before the third discussion at the Parliament. And it's called the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill. And I isolated small sections from this statute. And the students were invited to read that as a play. So very basic kind of analysis of who is who are the characters, the roles, what do they do, what are the relationships, what is the event. We can talk, I'm assuming we can talk about what actually happened in the workshop. I'm just introducing a little bit the methodology that we followed. So that was one of the basic activities, and then they were invited to see how that can be presented. So not in the sense of creating a play within the play, but if someone wanted to explain that or to understand that for themselves in a more embodied way, what could be done? How would we get it up on its feet? One could say. The second part was focusing on the interviews. This is an extract from the refugee action report. So the students were introduced to a statement from a person that has gone through the asylum claim process. And they were talking about the interview and how they felt during that and how invasive and intrusive that had been for them. And we also looked at some of the questions. We can see this little box here from the toolkit of the charity organization Right to Remain. That is taken again from statements and testimonies from people that have gone through the process, because it's a very behind closed door process. There is no legal representation in the room. There is no chaperoning other than when it really has to be by law for particular age ranges and conditions that people have, but not for comfort, one would say, and potentially an interpreter. So it's a very closed circuit. And some examples of the interview were discussed, they were presented, and then the students were invited to reflect on those questions. They could use one for time and also focus and depth, and see what would happen, like try variations of interaction and relationship, like that is the script, that question, and then they could come up with an answer or not. And see how many ways there was to ask it, what is the environment, what is happening during that one question interview that they had. And then there was also some time for reflection on the activities. I would like to pause my presentation now, but if possible, at some point in the discussion, when we kind of analyze a little bit what we saw in the room, I would like to bring it back, if that's okay.
Of course.
Yes. I hope that wasn't a huge bombardment of information, but just to get us a little bit in the room of how that went. And I would like to invite Debora, who has been an absolute fabulous collaborator to this, to to offer some insight as well.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Natalie, for the glowing review. And thank you for kind of like the really kind of like how I got involved. And I think I'm going to speak a little bit about how I got involved, which is, the way this collaboration kind of like started. And it was, we didn't actually no, I mean, we knew each other at London Met, but with different hats on. So we didn't know what our other practice, what it was. And through Goldsmiths, actually, we kind of we started talking about the project that is Natalie's project. And I'm collaborating and I'm kind of supporting, but is absolutely Natalie's project. And very generously, she kind of invited me in. And I think what was very interesting for me, because my work is, in a way, is on the other side of the work that we have been doing with the students, and that Natalie is interested in researching, because obviously I work directly with asylum seekers and refugees, and the whole process of the process that we do is that we make theatre together that is made to reclaim all of the different narrative, all of the preferred narrative, to use a term from narrative therapy, all of the kind of different storylines that are beyond the label of refugee or asylum seeker. So is actually kind of to put aside the word of the law in a way, and to recover and reclaim and speak through the theatre, through performance, speaking all of these different identities that the people have and want to share with the world. But so what was very interesting for me was actually see the work from a different perspective, and going back to see as well exactly the text and the law. And it was very interesting for me to work with Natalie on planning the workshop and thinking about some of the ethical questions that we might have, like presenting this material to the students, and thinking about the way we were also presenting the experience of refugees. And therefore, some of the ethical questioning around how are we even presenting this reality, because obviously both me and Natalie don't have this experience, and therefore it was important to think about not flattening again this experience, even in the way we were presenting the workshop. So we had really interesting conversation about this, and about kind of also how to introduce certain elements of the workshop, and we had some kind of hunch about what could be some critical points, which I think later on, when we talk about what happened, we will reveal what that we kind of had the right hunches about it, and there was some kind of like key points where we're like, oh, that is interesting, like that we expected, that we didn't expect, and how kind of that informed as well the reflection that came after. And then the last thing I'm going to say, just yes, it was very interesting actually for me individually, although I've been working in this field for the past 15 years, and so I'm very familiar with with the experience of asylum through the eyes of the people I work with. But because actually, as I was saying, our work is more centered towards looking at the experience of life beyond the asylum process. It was very interesting for me as a practitioner also to really have a look at the law in that detail, because I myself hadn't done that. And so it was very interesting to take the time to actually look at that. And obviously I've heard of the big interview, how it's called, and the kind of horror stories about it. But it was very interesting even for me to kind of look at the actual questions of that interview. And so I think in this sense, the collaboration was such a fruitful collaboration because we were really able to see things from a variety of point of view, which obviously offered us the possibility to converse and discuss and analyze it. And analyze the finding from different point of view. Yes, and I think for now that's what
Thank you very much.
offer.
Thank you, Debora. And so, just before we move on then to Marina, maybe I'll just throw in an initial point, initial response to this project in relation to what you were both discussing, the two perspectives, and that also are part of this, and it makes me think of these different levels of performativity, you could say. First of all, going back to Natalie's point, I think this is where also so much originality is in this project of thinking actually legal language is performative. Of course, it can be understood, as you say, you can go as far as to understand it dramaturgically. So in terms of characters, in terms of dynamics, in terms of plot, and in terms of event. And there's what really strikes me is that there's also this these different layers of performativity, because of course on the other end of the spectrum from what Debora was saying is also how we can use performance as a way of empowering the participant to, particularly in a context of vulnerability, but also crucially that it can be open to all as well. So I think we'll talk about it later in terms of participation. Who are the participants of these projects? And because not only people who are directly affected by the themes that you talk about benefit, of course, from participating. So you don't have to be an asylum seeker to really benefit from really interrogating the process of asylum seeking. So this point is really interesting, and I think a part of our job in our research center is always to sort of emphasize how this, in terms of research, how do these projects work, and of course, as you both said, the findings are very often many of the findings are not just what comes out of interviews, but also what we as practitioners learn by doing this, by involving different people. Did you have any further thoughts on that point? And we'll of course come back to the more specifics of what happened. But if you want to already preempt it a little, and then I'll move to Marina, and then I'll come back for all of us to discuss together.
I would like to say that this project is consciously, like, one question would be why work with students, and where are the other people that should be. You talk about people in forced migration being the center of the project, but we don't see them yet, because there is also a conscious effort to explore methodology. And I know this is like the red balloon kind of risk, but I will say it. It's not that the students are not people that require attention and care. On the contrary, designing a workshop for students does require, I don't forget that I'm a lecturer, especially those students, most of them I know. So I feel obliged to offer them something and protect them at the same time. So I'm transferring some of the questions that might be there of how to design a workshop for people in situations of forced migration, bringing it forth to a slightly more familiar yet with high stakes environments. So there is maybe even an element of pedagogy in there. So I was trying to observe the methodology I'm trying to set up for this, as much as what the outcomes would be from the students' suggestions and response to those activities. And that was really important. And also I feel very fortunate with both cohorts that I work in that were very different, that they engaged so deeply and they were so willing to go into something that no one was feeling comfortable about the topic before we started. Like, no one knew most things, probably, variations in people's experiences and backgrounds. But it's theatre and performance students were like, whoa, asylum law, what is that? And of course, law students were like, oh, okay, am I going to get up and perform? So there was that reluctance at first, but with the introductory thing, especially the way that Debora led the second kind of workshop at the beginning, kind of bringing people together and finding things in common, was very, very useful. So then it was not about the things we don't know. It's about how are we going to tackle together those questions? How can we kind of, even in a playful way, how can we approach that? What can we understand? What can we learn? What's and with less kind of guilt, in a sense, like we kind of without going there from a place of fear, but from a place of curiosity, I would think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Debora, did you want to?
Yeah, if I can add just very quickly, I feel that this type of workshop actually, I think, are even more needed, or I think important for students or for other people that don't have the experience of migration. Exactly for this reason, I would say that a workshop like this and I think we discussed this at the very beginning with Natalie, and was like, is it appropriate to actually involve people with experience of forced migration? And actually we discussed it, and we thought that it wasn't at this stage, one, because obviously it was the beginning of like experimenting with the methodology, but also because very often the problem is that those labels put on people, what happens is that these stories are so charged emotionally, legally, are profoundly charged, and actually to ask people that with that experience to ask them, to relive them, to actually analyze the questions that they've been through, it could be very traumatizing, and it could be quite problematic. There might be some people that are in a different phase where they want to campaign, they want to speak their truth, they want to speak their story, and therefore actually they might be very interested in looking at the law and campaigning and making the process of the interview more humane. But actually there was like this discussion of like, okay, probably we're going to get there, and trying to think as well, who are the people that will be the one that could actually be part of it in a way that is fruitful for everyone, and is not, and there is, as Natalie was saying, a care for everyone involved.
Yeah. Thank you, Debora. And this leads perfectly into Marina's project, because, of course, as I'm sure Marina will talk about later on, maybe in the discussion, not necessarily in the initial presentation, but of course, the question of who are the participants is also another one that was very, very fundamental for Marina's work. And so before you start, Marina, I'm going to just I'm happy to share the slides if you prefer. Should I do that? And let me just we've had a few technical glitches today, so let's not jinx it. And so first of all, I'll just quickly introduce Marina. Marina Moreno is an interdisciplinary artist and independent choreographer born in Venice and based in the UK. Her use of media ranges from installation, live art, video sculpture, photography, film, dance and visual theatre. Her interests are in the production of innovative and experimental art work that has direct interaction and dialogue with the audience. Among the organizations that have commissioned projects or shown works by Marina, there's many, I'll cite a few: Tate Liverpool, South Bank Centre, the Liverpool Independent First Biennial, Watershed, Arts Council of England, Arnolfini, Electric Pavilion, Electric December, Bristol City Council, Venice City Council, Venice and Milan Carnival, and the University University of West of England, amongst many others. She has both directed and collaborated with many artists, and is the originator of Art Emotion, which is a company through which also then Marina then later became an associate of Tate Exchange Liverpool, and currently she also coordinates the public engagement program at Fondazione Marta Czok in Venice. And so I'm just going to share and you tell me, Marina, when you want me to switch slides, and let's see if we can do it nice and slickly. I think so. Yeah.
Thank you.
So
yeah. So yeah, this is will come from somewhere, which started in 2019, like Jacek said. It actually it was shown at the Tate Liverpool. It was commissioned by Tate Liverpool, and through Tate Exchange. So you probably know about the Tate Exchange. It was very much a place where to share with people. So you would develop a work, but one of the main aim was inclusion and share the work with people, where the participant would be actually active. So really making the piece. So I had this idea, I guess because I come from Venice, I'm quite obsessed with the shipyard ropes. But I had this idea that because for me, I did other projects as well, where for me the sea, which at the moment is something that can be really dreadful, but actually it should be something that unite people. And so the idea of these ropes, it reminds me of ships that would arrive, and with that would arrive a new culture, a new world, and different things. And so the idea was that the people would come, and I would ask them to choose a rope, because as you can see, there are many, many colors. And then they would tell me where they come from, and we would measure in scale the distance of where they come from to the Tate Liverpool, and cut the rope. With that, they will make their own sculpture. So as you can see, there are many different types, some very abstract, some more sort of figurative, if you want. And then the idea was to make altogether a landscape. I would ask them, at that time, where they want to place it. So so to create a world with no borders, in a way, because it was about telling each other the stories and just work together, basically. And also you can see the labels there. The labels would tell the distance of where they come from to there, so in kilometers. And then they would say, if they wanted, they could put their name, and they could also perhaps write a little phrase to tell about their journey. And so for this, it was really interesting, because also it was during the Biennale in 2019, was the Biennale of Liverpool. So there were loads and loads of people coming through. And in a way, you had to be really open. In a sense, it was very, rather than select people, it was really like, okay, I'm here and let's do it. And a lot of time people didn't want to stop because of the Biennale, but then once they were engaged, they would actually stay for the whole period, for the whole day. Sometimes they would come back, they would bring friends, or they would come and see what happened in the space. So it was really, really, I was really grateful for that. There were also many workshops, one of which Jacek did with the Rhythm of the World, I remember. And then there was writing workshops, and there was performances, there were films that were taken from people, and it was about refugees, asylum seekers. So it was really, so there was a variety of things.
I'm going to, Marina, I'm just, shall I move to the next image to give us a little bit of background to your practice?
Yeah, so I guess my practice built bit by bit, but there's always been this idea of inclusion anyway. That's really, really important still for me. and also breaking stereotypes, because I can't stand stereotypes. Like you were saying before, you can have an image of someone, and it's actually not at all. There's many facets to a personality, to who you are, for any of us. This one was done both in Bristol. It was called Umana Laguna. It was done both in Bristol, but also in Venice. It was commissioned by the Venice City Council at that time. And so initially I wanted to have 4 people from different background and different ages, different sex, and be able to follow them throughout the day. So to kind of see what the viewer would see, as if you are entering someone's house. And the idea, again, I started with an actor, a brilliant actor, but it kind of didn't work at all. So I understood that I had to have real people, and I started talking to various people. So this is also an example of my work that is always kind of hybrid, because they perform themselves in a sense. So they go through the day, different stages of the day. So they wake up, they get up, and then they all have breakfast. So they would have their own type of meals. Then I follow them. They might go. So there was a Macedonian woman. She goes to an Orthodox church. Then there was this guy is sick, and he would go to the Sikh temple, which was brilliant. And then, but it was so interesting to see how there's so many similarity between all these different culture. And what was really nice to see is when people would watch it, they start watching, because it was done with projection. So you were effectively like in a room, but lived by 4 people in a sense. And then people would watch one person in particular. For some reason, they were attracted to one person, but it was like entering their place. And again, it was so to dismantle this idea of, stereotypes and what you think of your neighbor, that you haven't got any idea unless you meet them for real. And I guess, so this is one of the example where I always talk about either displacement or migration, and I've done several work about that. But more recently, I'm interested really in participation, in active participation. And there's always, in a sense, an element of performance, not like straightforward theater in a sense, but it's it's performative. So people always get involved. What was really important, we all come from somewhere. It was about, there was a big table, you can see only a little bit here. And on this big table, people would just sit down to make the sculpture. And the whole thing became quite organic. So people start to talk to each other. So for example, in the background, the woman on the background here, she was an asylum seeker. The other guy is a sculptor. And the fact is I'm sorry. Yeah. And the fact is they were just talking to each other. So in this particular project, I also work with a group of asylum seeker refugees. These 2 people in the foreground, they were really, really eager to tell their stories, because the fact is they were now able to be in England, but I don't know all the legal terminology, but what happened is that their son, who was disabled, had been waiting for like 2 years. They've been waiting for 2 years and he was still waiting. He wasn't allowed to join. And so the other thing is, so this one studies in Marta Czok, Fondazione Marta Czok. And again, there were different people we explore. So the person in the middle is Edson, who was doing a workshop about writing, because again, this gives you opportunity for many disciplines to encounter and to tell stories. what I found through this project also, that a lot of time people want to tell their story. So I realized that it was a possibility, a place for them to exchange and to meet. Unlike other projects, this was open to everybody. So the journey was really for everybody. And yeah. So again, this is other group of people. And there were, yeah, so you can see they're working together. We're using aluminum to make the sculpture. Again, I tried different type of metal. This was very, very malleable, so it was easy for everybody to use. And yeah, again, it just happened. People start talking together. So in a way, it's also normalizing this idea of migration, which I'm very aware in some ways it is not to say that all migration is the same, because people have totally different situations, some very traumatic, but it's just a place where you can meet, because I think it's fundamental that people meet and start talking to each other, and this process seemed to work by itself. I think also in a lot of my project, what I tend to do, there's always a one-to-one moment, and that allow me to overcome maybe this fear, or to be able to meet people in a different way, in a much more personal way. So, for example, in this case, there are the ropes. So the cutting of the ropes, you start a conversation. By doing that, also, I realized that sometimes people, they were able to choose their own culture. So, for example, in Tate Liverpool, I met someone, a Chinese woman, but she was Liverpudlian, but she chose to arrive from China, because she was saying, you know, my grandfather was Chinese. I feel very much this is my culture.
So when you say,
was,
sorry, Marina, to
yeah.
interrupt. So when you say that she chose for this particular task, when you ask people the point of origin, you can choose according to your own perception of. So, for instance, I may be born in a particular city, but I feel the link to another city or another situation because of heritage, for instance.
I think, yeah, for example, but it just happens because my intention to begin with was, okay, where are you from and where do you arrive? And then as you encounter people, it sort of grew by itself. This, you know, the answer were different because, and I had to allow it, because most of the way I like to work is not knowing what people will do or what happened, but just be there and question, because like you said before, all of you, is like a way to enrich yourself and to be able to ask questions without asking properly. Do you know what I mean? You're just curious, you want to meet people, and then if you're just open, people will the project will grow by itself, in a sense. That's what I found. Yeah.
And I think we've got one last image.
Yeah. So again, this is another group of people, young people that arrived, and again they made many sculptures, and
there's almost this idea, right, Marina, of this notion of this living archive that you develop with this with this project, right?
Yeah. So the idea is that it will continue. And it will continue in a sense of, in both senses. I think I want to try different things. I think I was talking before to you about the idea of having, for example, lawyers that would be able, because for me it's really important that, okay, there is an aesthetic, there is a place where people can talk, people can meet and know each other, and it's fundamental for me. But also it would be nice to have a practical way where people can empower themselves and also gain some knowledge. I think that's really quite amazing. And yeah, the archive, it means I would love to take in different ports and be able to grow the kind of you know, landscape, if you want. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Marina.
you.
I'm now going to talking. Let's start from that point. So we're going to open it into a conversation now. One of the things that strikes me in both of the projects is the notion of participation, because as we mentioned before, participation also implies very key ethical questions, because you, for a start, particularly when you're also engaging with communities that are vulnerable, then obviously there are very specific concerns to do with that, of course, and how to make sure that the artistic process doesn't inadvertently exploit their presence, or as Debora said, make people relive traumatic experience purely for the sake of the artistic journey of the project. So there's an important sort of ultimately in creating an art project, we are in a position of power and of privilege, because obviously we're in a situation where we can allow other people to come in, and so that obviously becomes ethically very complex. But what also strikes me about these projects, so clearly you're on both levels, you are dealing with ethical questions, but also crucially that one of the strategies is to expand who participates in the project. Now, you both referred to this because in Natalie and Debora, of course, you have in the different phases, of course, there will be different participants. But for instance, part of the idea is obviously in the participation of students who may not share the experience of migration, or of course of legal practitioners that may not directly have lived through the experience of migration. There is an important element that I think that has a parallel also with in Marina's case, with this idea that actually by in two different ways, of course according to the project, but by expanding this notion that by showing the empathically how by engaging empathically in the experience of migration, even when it isn't your own, there is a power there in relation to the benefit that a project like this can do, because as you said, it is as much these are as much projects that are based on the experience of migration, but also that simply are about migration, which is an issue that we should all experience and directly know. Marina, you wanted to say something there?
Yeah, although there is this kind of way of being empathic and so on, but I'm very aware as well that one of the reasons why the Tate Liverpool worked really well is when I worked with an association. So they introduced me to this group of refugee and asylum seeker. And I spent many weeks going there and start sharing the idea. But also when they came over, there was a facilitator. And I was really reassured with that, because like Debora said, it could be a very traumatic experience, and I have no way to be able to cope with that, for example, as much as you try, but you have to be very aware of these things. So that was really important.
Yeah. And Natalie and Debora?
I think there's various levels of ethical concerns in any such project. And first of all, my research engages with ethics of care on a very straightforward level. It's part of what forms the methodology and what is explored as well. What is the applied care that can appear there? I at the moment I don't see any other way of of being able to move through the practical side of it. But there is various ethical concerns, even more when the co-creators and the co-producers in the workshop are not primarily from experiences of forced migration. We don't know, by the way, we never know. We might know for some of our students when they've talked about themselves, what their journey is, but it's very incomplete in any sense. And the difference is that they don't come into the room with that part of themselves at the forefront, or it's not It's not why they've been invited there, but that creates, because exactly there is absence of the people that we want to support in that case, it's even more, I felt the responsibility to be more intense, to not misrepresent, to not talk about people in forced migration without them, which is something we very often do with all marginalized and oppressed groups, to not allow for stereotypes. As Marina said, we all have this allergy. I think everyone present here today has this allergy against stereotypes and misrepresentations and misconceptions and monolithic kind of figures and understandings. So there was a lot of that, and there was also the ethics of how to run a workshop today in the first place. So even the very simple thing that I've noticed for myself in the last few years of removing touch from any kind of interaction with the participants, which is something that was very, very different in my training, changes the communication, changes the code, changes how it is a very co-creative, co-productive environment, but at the same time, we have to ensure that people have their safe and brave space around them for themselves, but also in that community that we're forming. So again, it's all is in double levels. I don't think I find a way to think about one thing at a time. They usually come into this, but that was like Debora's, the way we work together about the activity. So Debora asking me questions about things and or me asking questions was helping us to exclude some things, or to say, okay, we can't take that risk. Up to that point, we can't take the other risk. So to give an example, something that really stood out, especially in the workshop at London Met, was the first big activity that I mentioned earlier about reading statute and then getting up on our feet, as we say, to try to present that in a more performative way, proved to be quite problematic at first glance altogether, but isolating what could be shifted, it's one very important aspect that we both decided that we will shift in the future, and that is no one should be representing the appellant or the claimant, the person in the migrant, because however carefully, with how much attention or even the details some people try to bring in what they were showing, however distance they try to remain, or however identifying they were trying to be, it was always some sort of image that did not come from a point of authentic understanding, that did not come from a point of actually having that contact and relationship. It doesn't help that most students in all institutions usually go for a super realistic, not hyper realistic, but super realistic emotion depiction situation. I don't know what what I've been doing wrong with my students, but and although there was a kind of like an invitation to embrace some Brechtian approach to that, still most students went into that with, I'm going to embody that person in its fullest kind of like most realistic depiction. So of course that is very problematic for things we have no context for, things we have no background for. So we spotted that very quickly, and we tried to redirect it. It wasn't possible on the day, but now we've decided that this is something we're going to change in the instructions. And I already changed that with a different set of people I work with. I work with barristers very recently, doing different type of activities, absolutely. But I did put on my notes, whoever wants to discuss or present or represent people in situations of forced migration, find you just narrate about that. You don't impersonate, you don't do their voice, you don't try to be their body, you don't try to speak on their behalf. You just narrate verbally, or you can design it, or in whichever other abstract way, you imply their presence in a way, or you just say what your impression of that person is, rather than try to say this is how they were. And that was an important one for us.
So again, talking about what you've learned by the process, because and in a sense and I should say at this point, by the way, we are very much welcome questions from our audience. So so feel free to, if you want to raise your hand to ask a question, that'll be or to simply make a comment that can help us to continue the discussion. Please do. This point about okay, I can see one question already. Ronke, please.
Can I, just before the question, can I just add
Yes.
one thing?
Yeah.
just to complete what Natalie was saying about this, because it was such an important learning point. And when this stereotype, they crept up really in the workshop, which is what was the fear that we had, and then we saw represented. It's not because, obviously, it's not because it's like, oh, wow. It's not because of the people, what they saw. It's just because this is our unconscious bias over these things. So it was extremely interesting to see that even though we were there thinking about the cruelty of asylum law, the cruelty of this interview, all of these stereotypes, they just came up naturally and unchallenged in that sense. So we had to challenge them, because that is exactly what we carry, we have, is what is in our mind. And therefore, I think that's why it's so valuable as well to look into that, because then we can create an encounter that is ethical in the way that we assume a responsibility for the other, no? Like, so we are responsible for the encounter, and we are responsible for the parameters in which we organize the encounter.
And that's when the performance becomes useful as well, because if we break it down, we did have two very good examples of people going into that and changing absolutely nothing, like not trying to be the migrant, which worked. And it was the most kind of, if we go for the realistic kind of thing, truthful or whatever. So we had that, but that was just because those students had that approach, and also they're good performers. But as from a point of view of what the structure is, this was something that really kind of was important. But we will come back to some other observations, of course, from activities. But that lovely raised hand, I want to thank before they speak.
Absolutely.
I want to thank Ronke very, very much for making this happen with the Department of Law.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no. You're very welcome. It was a really. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you. I was really intrigued. It was a really interesting combination. If you think in many respects, law is about theatre anyway, in terms of the costumes and so on in the courts, you can see the relationships there. It was an interesting point that you were making in terms of how you try to separate the individual from, and the performance from, from the narrative and what the subjects, if you like, have encountered. But I think increasingly it's actually very difficult to have that objective view to many things, just in terms of the way things are going in terms of immigration. That there is an immediate and natural almost conflation between immigration and illegality and criminalization, to the extent that people don't actually even question it. It's almost an assumption. We also have changes that are being proposed at the moment in terms of a very natural and almost inevitable move away from human rights, and how we are changing and how there is an approach to change the convention to eliminate these terrible abuses of the convention by looking at family as a defense. There's increasingly an attempt to downplay the importance of expertise. And I know Rishi's probably going to come in on this particular point, but certainly within the law, just take the recent example of the Supreme Court case, and there are people challenging the most senior judges in the country. So really difficult to separate the two. Sometimes I think it's, if we're looking at it from a legal perspective, you have to be dispassionate. You can be sympathetic. In some instances, we can be empathetic. But it is important, I think, to try to remember what the process is for law, how we interpret it, how we apply particular words, what the meaning of those words are. And it's really important to be, to have a degree of clarity with that, because it is about, you provide a statute, you create a statute that has to be valid, for the future indefinitely. So the words that you use and the interpretation is very, very important. The last point I wanted to make is this idea of othering, and we see that increasingly. And I don't know whether that's an effect from identity becoming an important feature in so many ways that was not the case 2 or 3 years ago. I know exactly what you mean about touching people. If you're very, if you're a very tactile person, suddenly I do the same thing. I find myself sort of pulling back, because you might want to be empathetic and sympathetic to a person, but you can't do that. And it's a real shame in a way, because it's just adding to those boxes that we all seem to have created. But ideas about immigration, culture, identity are so loaded, I think, at the moment, that it will be difficult, I think, to separate what is being said from who is saying it. And so perhaps a way of, rather than trying to be dispassionate, to try to think about how you might have protective measures or parameters in terms of what people say and how they say things. And that's not an easy fix, I think, in our current environment. But it was really interesting to look at the connections between law and theatre and how the different perspectives work. We have modules with things like mooting, where there is an element of theatre, but it is very, very confined in terms of the language that is used, the arguments that are raised. But having an element of performance and those skills, I think, can actually be something that benefits both subject areas. So yeah, it was really interesting. We should talk more anyway. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can I briefly respond, Jacek? Oh, Jacek is frozen.
I think Jacek's frozen, isn't he?
Yeah. So Ronke, thank you so much. And like I said, your support and helping put this together is ingrained in the methodology, of course, because it is important to have the opportunity to bring within the same institution. We work with students from different departments, and to see how kind of like the way they've learned to work has some things in common, and how also they're coming from different subjects. I'm trying to find for myself first, what could the balance be, because I'm definitely not one that would go for of all sympathy and all drama, and let's just bring that in the law, because that's not what's missing. I don't think that people are not empathetic. In fact, I do believe that barristers are very empathetic creatures, and they're very passionate as well. And in context, they can be very expressive within kind of like the robe limitations. But I think it has to do more about how that this research is more about finding how that can be embedded in structures, as you said, in the practice. So how there can be examples and procedures of care within that. Interestingly, something I mentioned to the students, and they were all like, so some of the training that we do for trauma-informed practice is part of what is on the Office for Immigration Services training. The same exact phrasing, and we were looking at that with Debora as well, like read body language, give breaks. It's all there. We know that none of this is happening, absolutely not. So it is how can we use those practices to actually kind of, you know, subvert this. And in fact, during the interview, it's very, very interesting that you said you can't separate what is said from who is saying it. A couple of students noticed that and others from Goldsmiths as well, that no matter how you say those questions, most of them are horrible. They are there, and a particular student said it's like they're setting people up to fail. They're coming from an assumption that these people are criminals. So the students, most of the students didn't know the term crimigration, and they realized it through the activities. That's an interesting observation as well. Like their feedback was like, all of this is making people look like criminals and treating them like people that have done something wrong. So they figured that out from reading the statute and going through the little activities as well, or kind of going through the questions. They're like, we tried. One group said, we've read those questions in 5 different ways. We use all our vocal training, all our like tone, inflation, pitch, whatever, slowing down, smiling. They're wrong. They're just wrong in the way that they're written originally. And imagine going through an interpreter, and imagine being in a room on your own. So thank you for breaking that up, and we should definitely speak more. Absolutely.
Definitely. I'm just, thank you so much, Ronke. This is, and I apologize. I think my I don't know if you noticed that my computer did, so I had to leave and come back. Classic when you're trying to record an event, but there you go. So, but I was able to keep listening while all this was happening, and I was panicking. But it is a very interesting point, isn't it? And it also speaks to this idea of because again, we talk about performative practices, and often, and it's interesting how in vernacular language the word performative is becoming often used in a sort of essentially to pretend, it's fake, it's performative. Something that really for people, for those of us that work in performance, this is so frustrating, of course. But of course there is, because obviously performative has so many different dimensions. But the idea of one key concept in performance, of course, is the context in which you create an action, or you foster an action, a situation. And so just to bring back Marina in this point, because we talk about safety and the importance of safety, and it strikes me that in both projects that idea is very, very important. In fact, we talk about sort of questions that are difficult. Marina, your project is based on a question that is obviously kind of plays with a question that is so often used in anti-immigration narratives, which is, of course, is where do you come from? Often used in very aggressive terms, and of course you in your project, you take that question, you subvert it, and effectively to create a situation of shared experience where we realize that indeed we all come from somewhere, but also on a very nuanced way. We start to realize the degrees at which in which these experiences of whether we talk about migration, and of course we should also highlight the difference between forced migration and migration as movement, which may of course overlap in many cases, but may also be very, very distinctive. But this idea of safety becomes very crucial in allowing for participants to be ethically involved and to feel that they benefit, so that it's not just the artist who's benefiting from the work, which is often the case for one of the key concerns in participatory art, that we may inadvertently arrive to a situation where who is benefiting from this other than the artist. And so tell us, Marina, just to bring back just this other perspective in terms of what creates that sense of safety, of ethical grounding of a project such as yours.
I think it's possibly this fact that everybody is kind of sharing in a very natural, in a very organic way. So you don't put yourself in someone else's shoes in a way. You're just there, and everybody is sharing together. I was thinking though, in terms of, it is a big problem. Sometimes you think, well, okay, I've done that, but who is listening? Who is benefiting? Of course, is a question that will come very, very often. And also, very often, you form very strong relationship with the people you work, but then the project finish, and that's it, And okay, with some people you might still connect, but in a different level,
Sure.
And that is also very problematic for an artist, I think, in this situation, because you build so much. So in some ways, and in some cases, I've been able to sort of leave, and then someone else will pick up the project, someone that was part of it, and that is very rewarding. But very often it doesn't happen because of situation, the organization, and so on. So that's another big question for me.
Definitely. So, because again, there's also the idea of the legacy of a project. When the artist, for instance, leaves a particular project, often the artists themselves may be blamed for, why are you leaving the project now that we were getting to create these important relationships? But there's also, of course, a reality behind it that the often lack of funding, lack of support doesn't allow that to continue. So there's a more systemic situation through which that happens. But it's a really, really important point. And I think, now that as we're getting towards the end of this session today, I'd love to talk to address a bit more the idea of legacy and also what happens after, because again, as we saw, or both of these projects are two examples of projects that are very, in their own completely different ways, are very iterative, and they continue to evolve. Natalie.
So I'm gonna do something very, very cheeky. Jacek, I hope you don't mind.
No,
I'm going to bring back my presentation.
Yes, go for it.
This is a very recent edition. I said I want to show something.
Yes, please free.
So, sorry, this is material from the reflection and the activities of how the students were working. And we mentioned a few, we could mention a couple, but this is, this is, because you just said legacy, so that was such a good segue. So this is a photo from, I'm not saying this to Jacek, I'm saying this to everybody else, from the company Artichoke. And
that's right, yes.
The project is called Sanctuary, which is very, very interesting in relation to migration. And something that's all of us are striving for. This is what we're trying to create, a sort of a sanctuary. So and I was kind of going into a little bit of depth into Jacek's contribution, and he hasn't paid me for this. I'm sure he's almost upset on bringing this up today, but it tied really nicely the concept of how the participation can become more of a mass scale. And this project has to do with artists, so there are very different questions to ask there. It's like an artistic project. It's probably closer to Marina in a sense, but it helped me pull a thread around this idea of placemaking, as you put it, on how much involved, how am I considering the people that are involved in this project a community that can change the place? Like, I know it sounds very philosophical and abstract, but can migration, and that is constant movement, and that is happening. It's a place that is moving and it's happening, and that's migration. As Ronke mentioned, we can't think of migration as something that happens to the people next door, especially forced migration, I mean. So is that a place? And all of the people that we're trying to bring on this project, I'm talking about my project, where I'm trying to bring people from institutions that are in training, students, people, barristers from the chambers, other practitioners from theatre. So different communities. And of course, last but not least, we're going to start working with people from backgrounds of forced migration in the autumn. So could that be what is seen as the community that you mentioned in the placemaking essay? Like, could that start growing from the smaller groups, from the individual to the smaller groups, to being that community that is trying to change the conditions for making that place something else, to repurpose and to decriminalize immigration, to decriminalize asylum seeking, to kind of change from the narratives to, hopefully, I know this now has gone to another level, but like, how could we change the actual law? I mean, the bill is there. It's much more scary than the previous bills, so it's definitely not going in that direction now. On the other hand, we can see that it is something that is constantly updating. Like in the last 4 years, we've had 4 different statutes. This has never happened before in such frequency. We had never had like acts around migration so back to back. There was one in 76, and then there was one in 81, and so it's like now this is constantly in everyone's, agenda. So I'm going to put a stop there, but this is, for me, it made me think about the next steps and what these workshops and these communities could potentially prepare for.
And I think that's a really good example. And by the way, I may as well plug in the publication that was in it, which is the Routledge handbook for trauma informed placemaking, and I was contributing this chapter on this work by Artichoke. But and thank you for mentioning that, Natalie, because actually it is a really interesting example of participatory practice and the idea of building a community, which then leads to the sort of this last point to finish on, which is again the idea of how do you measure impact? Because in research terms, we talk about impact all the time, and often those of us that work in practice-based artistic methods, be these pedagogical or within more of an exhibition setting, etc., within more of a performance setting, etc. How do you measure impact? And part of the movement, of course, now is to really think of impact a little bit very much inspired by what Natalie raised before, the ethics of care. In the same way that we should expand the notion of ethics to be not just a formal kind of work that often happens bureaucratically rather than empathically, then in a similar way we should measure impact in ways that really highlight the individual benefits that projects like these do. I know, obviously, from direct experience, both with in your work, obviously I wasn't there, Natalie and Debora, in your workshops. I'm pretty sure that I can that it's had an incredible impact on the participants, and equally I was able to see very directly from in Marina's work that incredible impact that it has on the individual, and just the idea again of how the individual can feel that the problems and issues that we often think maybe that are often othered, as Ronke was mentioned before, actually become relatable in a way that, and we feel responsible in a way that is not just in terms of the potential problems that they raise, but also in terms of the potential for change, and therefore we feel empowered because we're responsible as well. And so if I can just ask, Natalie, do you mind just stop sharing, unless you wanted to say something more, and then we'll do very, very last. We are running. It's now 7 p.m. precisely.
I just want to thank some people very quickly because otherwise this project wouldn't be anywhere. So it's obviously Debora. Well, first of all, my participants and co-creators at the workshops, my students, Debora, Minà, and Dr. Pamela Karantonis from TAP, and Professor Dimitris Yanilopoulos from Goldsmiths, as well as Jacek and Rishi and Ronke from London Met for making this happen, as well as David Gurnham and Haris Charas from Southampton, where we're going to go in autumn, and my mentor Claire Finbrew, Deligiani, Wesian Creature, and everyone that has been here today Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, Natalie, I'm going to have to ask Marina to do the same. Marina, say your thank yous.
The long list.
No,
I thank you, everybody.
But it really does, raise this point, isn't it, that these projects are also huge collaborative efforts, and they're so, and which of course doesn't diminish the individual voices of the people that made them happen. Let's not forget that, against often the reality of funding of all these other challenges. This is clearly a discussion that we can continue and that needs to continue in the future. I hope for those of us that joined us until the very end, I hope this has been of interest, and this is also the last session of our Creature events. Although tomorrow, for those of you that are in London and can come to London Metropolitan, we are opening an exhibition called Making Matters, which is Creature's annual exhibition for making art as a form of research. And we continue to interrogate this idea of how art practice in all its forms, including, of course, performance and performative practices, are indeed a form of research that may often sit, in this sort of different sort of position in relation to some of the standard methods and processes that academic research may go, traditionally on. But of course, as we are seeing, indeed, the research practice research does really extend what we mean and has benefited academia as a result, precisely because it stretches this notion. Somebody was asking, I think Rebecca, you were asking, which campus is it on? It's in Aldgate, and it's at the Wash Houses. So tomorrow it opens at 5:30, Making Matters, and so I'll be there. Hope to see some of you. Thank you so much. Now I'll say my thank yous as well. Thank you so much, Natalie. Thank you so much, Debora. Thank you so much, Marina. This has been a brilliant opportunity to discuss this, and also another thank you to Ronke as well for this really important perspective that you brought in, which is really really important to in this type of discussion. So thank you so much, and you will see, and if you look, just to finish, if you also are able to visit our website, the best way to get there is to simply type Google Creature London Met. Don't try and go through the university website, you'll never get there. Right? But if you go on Google, you tend to get there fairly easily. And what you see is that we record this session and other sessions, and they will be there as part of our archives of new practices and new research efforts within practices research and art and design. Thank you so much all. Have a lovely evening, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Yata.
Bye.
Thank you, Debora.
Bye.
Thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
Bye, Ronke.
All right, take care.
Bye.